Greetings, my dear viewer. You're on the channel The Price of Cheating. The channel is for those who appreciate traditional family values and condemn adultery. So be sure to subscribe to the channel. Let's get started. 4 years ago, my life was a far cry from the despair that now defines it. Back then, everything seemed ordinary, even promising. My wife, Rebecca, had just embarked on a new chapter by accepting an entry-level secretarial job at Nova Plex, a fitness equipment company headquartered in our town. With our twin daughters, Marcy and Mercy, entering their teenage years, Rebecca was eager for a fresh challenge, and this opportunity seemed like the perfect fit. I should probably introduce myself. My name is Henry Moore, though my birth name is John. For reasons unknown to me, Henry stuck from an early age. I've always been a bit of an oddball, average height, barely 140 pounds when I finished high school, and disinterested in conventional sports. My real passion was long-range shooting, a solitary hobby that gave me a sense of purpose and achievement. Throughout high school and college, I dedicated myself to honing my skills in marksmanship and reloading ammunition. After countless hours of practice, I reached a level where I could reliably hit a 2-inch target from 100 yards. My weapon of choice was a Remington 700, and mastering it was both my joy and my pride. College was a pivotal period for me. It's where I met Rebecca, the woman who would become my wife, and where I formed a partnership with Chuck Fuller, a friendship that eventually evolved into a business venture. Aside from those two significant milestones, my college years were uneventful. I earned a degree in geology, got married, and joined Chuck in starting a small surveying firm. Life was uncomplicated and steady, marked by modest success and a sense of independence. Neither Chuck nor I ever worked for anyone else. We built our business from the ground up. With an initial investment of $2,500 each, Chuck and I launched a surveying company focused on small real estate projects. While the income wasn't extravagant, it was enough to live comfortably. Chuck married shortly after Rebecca and I did. My family owned a rustic cabin, affectionately called the Bungalow, on 160 acres in Schuylkill County, a beloved spot for family gatherings during my childhood. Chuck's family, on the other hand, had a 640-acre hunting cabin in Potter County. These properties may seem like minor details now, but they would later hold significant relevance. The cracks in my seemingly stable life began to form about 4 years ago, coinciding with Rebecca's new job. Nova Plex, the company she joined, specialized in designing and manufacturing fitness equipment, with its headquarters conveniently close to home. At first, her job appeared to be a perfect fit: reasonable hours, decent pay, and a short commute. For the first year, everything seemed to be going well. Rebecca was thriving in her role, and our family life continued uninterrupted. But things took a turn when Lucas Wilson joined Nova Plex as the marketing manager. A former NFL defensive player, Lucas was charismatic and larger than life, quickly becoming the face of the company. Rebecca worked closely with him in the marketing department, and he soon became a fixture in our family conversations. Both Rebecca and the girls were captivated by his charm and celebrity status. For the first 6 months, I endured endless stories about Lucas Wilson. But just as quickly as their admiration for him had flared, it seemed to fade. Around the same time, Rebecca's behavior began to shift. She started working longer hours, and rumors began to circulate. Whispers I couldn't ignore. Growing up in the area, Chuck and I had connections at Nova Plex, and it wasn't long before I heard unsettling stories about Rebecca and Lucas spending time together outside of work. Their deepening relationship marked the beginning of the end for my marriage. I never confronted Rebecca about the affair. Instead, she grew increasingly distant. Her work trips became more frequent and more prolonged, often under the guise of promotional events or conferences. Occasionally, she would invite me along, only to sideline me for the entire evening. Physical and emotional intimacy vanished, and I began to feel like an afterthought in her life. Our once close family life had been full of traditions, weekend getaways, annual vacations, and unwavering support for the girls' activities, from ballet to soccer. Rebecca had been deeply involved in their lives, organizing school events, leading scouts, and ensuring we always had a weekly pizza night. Even trips to the bungalow, which the girls disliked, were part of our family fabric. But all of that was gradually stripped away. Rebecca's trips became more frequent and more inclusive of our daughters, leaving me behind to an increasingly empty home. The life I had built began slipping through my fingers, and the person I used to be seemed to vanish alongside it. I was never asked to join their circle, nor did anyone invite me to participate. Instead, I frequently overheard the girls animatedly recounting their latest escapades to each other, always within earshot, yet conspicuously excluding me. When I was around, their conversations would abruptly fall silent, a deliberate act. Although Lucas Wilson's name never appeared in their tales, it was evident he was a central figure in their outings. Everything came to a head during the New Year's party hosted by the Novaplex. Rebecca had no choice but to extend an invitation to me for this event, though I had no desire to go. Enduring her betrayals in silence was already humiliating. I dreaded the potential disaster if the evening unraveled further. Sadly, my apprehensions were well-founded. The women dazzled in their glamorous outfits, while Marcy and Mercy beamed with excitement at attending their first adult party. Without a tuxedo, I settled for my best suit. As we arrived, we were met by a throng of attendees, and Henry Moore greeted us with an overly enthusiastic welcome. "Delighted you could join us. Thank you for bringing your lovely wife and daughters," he declared, his grin too polished to be genuine. Lucas Wilson loomed nearby, his grin widening as he noticed my discomfort. His handshake was firm and lingered just long enough to make me grit my teeth, while Rebecca's smirk showed she enjoyed my discomfort. My daughters shot me cold, disdainful looks before walking away without a word. Thus began the torment of the evening. Nursing a single beer, I retreated to a quiet corner, hoping my presence wouldn't further embarrass Rebecca or the girls. Despite my silence, it was clear my being there tainted their enjoyment. Wilson, towering over everyone with his imposing frame, was the undisputed center of attention. My daughters mingled happily, and my wife spent the night attached to Wilson's side, her hand resting casually on his arm. A few lower-tier guests made half-hearted attempts at small talk, but their interest quickly fizzled. Meanwhile, mid- and upper-level executives exchanged smirks and murmurs, their glances toward me laced with mockery or pity. Although I couldn't hear their words, the meaning behind their expressions was unmistakable. I was the husband to be pitied or ridiculed. At some point, I swapped my beer for plain ginger ale, sipping it slowly as I focused on keeping my temper in check. Watching the festivities unfold, I saw my daughters thoroughly enjoying themselves, while Rebecca reveled in the night, her laughter and dance steps shared with Wilson. Hours passed, and not once did she or the girls acknowledge my presence. Near the dance floor, a small group of partygoers laughed and whispered, their attention occasionally drifting to Rebecca and Wilson. One of them pointed, eliciting another round of laughter that abruptly stopped when they caught me watching. Moments later, the laughter resumed, softer, but no less cutting. That was the breaking point. I set down my glass and made for the exit. As I turned, I saw Wilson's hands brazenly on Rebecca's waist, while she played with the back of his neck. Before I could fully process the scene, she pulled him into a bold, unapologetic kiss right there on the dance floor. Fury overtook reason, and my body acted before my mind could intervene. In a flash, I crossed the room and delivered a punch to Wilson with all the force I could muster. Pain exploded in my hand, and chaos ensued. The next thing I remembered was waking up in the back of an ambulance. The ride to the hospital was brief, and I quickly realized I was alone. After being wheeled into the emergency department, I drifted in and out of consciousness. When I finally regained clarity, a doctor informed me of the extent of my injuries. A broken hand, 3 fractured ribs, a broken nose, 3 missing teeth, 2 loosened teeth, a wired jaw, and a bruised kidney. Wilson's parting blow, a brutal strike to the groin, had caused additional internal damage. The doctor explained that I'd be discharged after 4 days, but would need 2 weeks in a rehabilitation center or home care. I opted for the rehab center, desperate to avoid returning home. When Rebecca and the girls visited that afternoon, their demeanor was as icy as ever. Rebecca appeared irritated, and the girls seemed entirely indifferent. Not a word was spoken. With my jaw wired shut, I saw no point in trying to break the silence. Even if I had wanted to say something, Rebecca's glare discouraged any attempt. Finally, she broke the silence, her tone dripping with contempt. "Henry, what do you have to say for yourself?" Her words carried no concern, only impatience and disdain. For once, I was certain of my next step. Silence was my only answer. Instead of replying outright, I muttered something unintelligible and motioned toward my jaw. The silence that followed was heavy, stretching on until she finally broke it. Her words were laced with humiliation as she recounted the scene. "It was mortifying, Henry. The girls were beyond embarrassed. We had to leave before midnight." Her voice cracked as she continued. "The whole evening was a nightmare, utterly ruined." "And for what? I should have known better than to take you out." She vowed it would never happen again, though the irony of her promise was lost on her. I just sat there, not even attempting a smile. I couldn't muster the energy. As I stayed silent, they lingered for a while, clearly waiting for a response. When none came, they left. Hours later, Chuck arrived. We exchanged a few words. Yes, I could still talk, before he handed me the local newspaper. My face was plastered on the front page beneath the headline, "Local NFL Star Protects Wife and Daughters from Abusive Father." The article spun a damning tale of how I'd allegedly assaulted my wife during the Novaplex New Year's Eve party, only to be heroically subdued by Lucas Wilson until the police arrived. The events didn't align with my memory, but the story was out there, and I knew it would stick. Chuck and I spent hours hashing out options. By the time he left, I'd skipped dinner and asked for a sleeping pill. I craved oblivion, a chance to shut it all out. The next day was consumed by endless medical evaluations and treatments for my injuries. The staff cataloged every bruise and break, offering the necessary care. All that remained was to heal and wait. They provided a list of nearby rehab centers, and I chose one close to Hamburg. That evening, Chuck returned. I sold him my share of the business for $2,500. Though our handshake sealed the deal, I remained a co-owner on paper. For now. Timing was everything. We shared a laugh about how 1 week at the rehab center cost the exact amount I'd just received. Rebecca and the girls didn't visit me in the hospital after that initial encounter. However, the day after I moved to rehab, they arrived, furious about being kept in the dark. Their anger only deepened when they were turned away at the door. Apparently, I had the authority to restrict visitors, and I had chosen to exercise it. When an orderly mentioned their attempts to see me, I couldn't help but chuckle, though it sent a painful throb through my ribs. The worst part of my injuries, however, was my teeth. Luckily, the rehab center offered on-site dental care for an additional fee, which I took full advantage of. As for my hand, the damage was less severe than initially feared. Even though I was cleared to leave rehab early, I decided to stay the full 2 weeks. By the 10th day, I could finally take deep breaths without pain. It was a relief like no other. Sarah didn't make any further attempts to see me. By mid-February, the National CrossFit Exhibition took place in Atlantic City. Sarah, the girls, Lucas Wilson, and the GE marketing team attended the event. Meanwhile, Chuck and a few employees spent that weekend moving my belongings to a bungalow in Schuylkill County. He made sure to pack my prized Marlin and reloading supplies. 2 days later, I was settling into my new home. That weekend, Chuck and his wife, June, stopped by. They mentioned that Rebecca had been looking for me at the office. Apparently, she was furious about no deposits being made into our joint account since the start of the year and demanded answers. Chuck spent 30 minutes explaining that I no longer had any ties to the business, not as an owner or an employee. Enraged, she stormed out, threatening legal action. Weeks passed, and I was healing steadily. My jaw wasn't as badly damaged as initially thought, allowing me to eat and drink normally again. My dental issues were resolved, and I decided to keep my broken nose. It added character. The bruises and aches were fading. True to his word, Chuck left me with a company truck and a credit card. I carried a significant sum of cash, anticipating it might become useful. My phone, however, remained with Chuck. The bungalow I had chosen for temporary lodging was cozy, though clearly not a long-term option. To fill my time, I began walking regularly, which gradually turned into light jogging. Lucas Wilson resided in a sprawling house along Duryea Drive, just beyond the town's outskirts. Duryea Drive was a winding road that climbed steeply up Mount Penn, discouraging heavy residential development in the area. Despite the scarcity of homes, locating Lucas's property was straightforward. I discovered a few secluded vantage points offering clear views of his residence. My mornings were dedicated to improving my physical endurance, while my afternoons focused on sharpening my firearm skills. I restricted my target practice to inanimate objects, using my Bushnell laser rangefinder to perfect my aim at a precise distance of 133 yards. My self-imposed benchmark was to reliably hit an egg from that distance before declaring myself ready. This routine led to frequent trips for eggs and eventually the acquisition of a suppressor. Evenings were spent refining my plans, reloading ammunition, and tweaking every detail. Time slipped by, marked by the slow growth of a beard. Chuck visited roughly every 2 weeks, bringing news that Rebecca had occasionally stopped by the office looking for me. Her visits dwindled after 2 months, ceasing altogether. Chuck also delivered clippings from the local paper. From these articles, I gleaned that my wife and daughters were flourishing in their new social circles, supported entirely by their benefactor. Since I hadn't contributed financially, he seemed to have taken full responsibility for them. Oddly, they continued to live in our old house, a puzzling detail. Regardless, I knew I had to press forward. Each morning I ventured into town to evaluate strategic positions around Lucas's property. Lucas adhered to a strict routine. Despite his robust frame, he swam daily, completing 50 laps in his heated pool every morning. That weekend, I abandoned the bungalow and headed to a remote cabin in Potter County. The cabin was a stark contrast to modern living. No electricity, plumbing, or cell service. The nearest Walmart, situated in Olean, New York, was a 45-minute drive away. Preparing for the harsh winter, I stocked up on supplies to last 4 months, ensuring I wouldn't need to travel once snow made the area inaccessible. I double-checked my list, leaving time to retrieve any overlooked items before the season turned unforgiving. Early on a Wednesday, I drove to my office, transferring all my equipment from the company truck into my Subaru Outback. I left the truck parked at a construction site near the mountain's base and hiked to the vantage point I had selected. The area was deserted at that early hour. Setting up my tripod, I loaded my rifle with 1 round chambered, another in the tube, and 2 more within reach. After a 20-minute wait, Lucas emerged for his usual swim. My first shot shattered his right ankle. The suppressed rifle's crack still echoed sharply in the quiet morning. 2 seconds later, I disabled his left knee. Quickly, I chambered 2 more rounds and struck his left elbow. My final target was his right wrist, but his erratic movements thwarted a clean shot. Satisfied, I broke down my setup and left without delay. 10 minutes later, I retrieved the truck from the construction site and drove back to my Subaru at the office. Rather than returning to the bungalow, I headed straight to Potter County. Once there, I focused on ensuring the spring produced clean water and stockpiled firewood for the coming winter. The cabin, now winter-ready, was well insulated, waterproofed, and outfitted with efficient LED lights in place of the old kerosene lanterns. With essentials secured, I resumed target practice, this time using paper targets. During my second week, I saw her for the first time. She was a tall, lean woman, dressed casually in jeans, a flannel shirt, and a vest. From a distance, I could make out a backpack or similar gear strapped to her. She followed an old logging trail that ran parallel to the clearing where I practiced shooting. Despite owning 640 acres, complete privacy remained elusive. Building the cabin closer to the road would have simplified supply transport, but such considerations were now moot. Curiosity eventually got the better of me, and one day I trained my scope on her as she walked by. A sleek, compact crossbow dangled from her shoulder, an odd accessory that stirred my curiosity, though I had no clue why she carried it. Near the edge of a clearing, I noticed a fire pit and a simple barbecue setup. Inspired, I decided to add my own touch. An old galvanized coffee pot and a fresh batch of my signature biscuits, something I took pride in. As I arranged everything, an odd sensation crept over me, as though I were laying some kind of trap. 3 days later, that trap bore fruit. "Excuse me," came her voice, catching me completely off guard. "My name's Claire. I was hoping we could have a chat." Flustered, I stammered before gesturing for her to take a seat. "Would you like some coffee?" It was the first thing I could think to say. She gave a polite nod, setting down her crossbow as she settled into the seat. "I'm Henry," I managed to reply. "I've been staying nearby for about 2 weeks now," she began. "I've seen you around a few times. I'm at the caretaker's lodge about a mile away. I like to take long walks, and this area has been a regular stop." Trying to make a good impression, I handed her one of my biscuits. "Are you here for long?" she asked, taking a small bite. "Just until the summer ends. How about you?" "I'll be around for at least 4 or 5 months," she said, savoring the biscuit but leaving the impression that she would have preferred her coffee with cream and sugar. She didn't say it, but I could tell. "Is this your land?" she asked curiously. "No, it belongs to a friend of mine. He lets me use it." "Do you hunt?" "Not anymore. I used to shoot occasionally, but now I stick to target practice." She hesitated, her tone softening. "Would it be all right if I used this area for practice? I've been struggling to find a good spot for my bow." Her accent had a melodic quality, hard to pin down, possibly British, Australian, or maybe Scottish. I didn't pry. "Of course," I said, eager to be accommodating. "We can set something up for target practice. Feel free to use it whenever you'd like." She smiled, reaching for another biscuit, a gesture that filled me with quiet satisfaction. "Most people go for compound bows these days," I remarked, "but yours is a recurve. Looks like it's brand new." "I prefer the simplicity of a recurve," she replied, her tone matter-of-fact. Her practice arrows were plain, but I couldn't help noticing the 4 hunting arrows always secured to her bow. That evening, I went out and bought 3 hay bales to set up a proper shooting range. And just like that, my summer with Claire Charles began. Each day, she'd visit to hone her archery skills, spending her afternoons practicing before heading back to the lodge. The staff at the lodge tracked her phone, so they always knew her whereabouts. By the second week, a sudden summer storm caught us off guard. We retreated to my cabin's porch, laughing as the rain drenched her walk back. Without hesitation, she pulled out her phone and called the lodge. "I won't make it back tonight," she told them calmly. "I've found a comfortable place to stay." Her statement left me speechless, but undeniably pleased. That evening marked a turning point in our relationship. What began as a friendly camaraderie shifted into something deeper. From that point forward, we alternated between my cabin and her place at the lodge. The lodge, Vista Lodge, was a striking contrast to the rugged surroundings of Potter County. Catering to a wealthy, often international clientele, it boasted luxuries that felt out of place in such a rustic area. Claire's family came from Cornwall, and the lodge's offerings, hot showers, gourmet meals, and laundry services, added a layer of comfort to our otherwise simple lifestyle. While our time outdoors had its charm, the occasional indulgence in modern conveniences made it all the more enjoyable. As the weeks passed, our visits to the shooting range grew fewer. One sunny afternoon, while we were enjoying lunch, Chuck and June arrived. June lit up at the sight of Claire and me together, her delight only growing as she realized the depth of our connection. In the beginning, the mood was light and playful, but as time passed, June and Claire withdrew for a private discussion. The calm atmosphere didn't last, as the shocking attack on Lucas Wilson quickly cast suspicion in my direction. This suspicion complicated Lucas's life in ways no one had anticipated. The relentless inquiries from reporters, all focused on why I was the primary suspect, only added to the chaos for both Lucas and my wife. While law enforcement concentrated their efforts on finding me, the media shifted its scrutiny to the connection between Lucas and my wife. Within just 3 weeks, Lucas Wilson had been ousted as the face of Novaplex. Meanwhile, investigators searched a bungalow in Schuylkill County, but found it completely abandoned. There were no clues, no activity on credit cards, no phone records, nothing to suggest where I might have gone. Nobody thought to question Chuck about the cabin. Chuck later confided that Rebecca had made several frantic visits to his office, desperate for any information about my whereabouts. Her anxiety was palpable. Her financial resources had run dry. It appeared Lucas had grown tired of her and laid the blame for his troubles squarely at her feet. As for me, I had no concrete plan. Returning wasn't an option, and I felt no enthusiasm for exploring other paths. I was adrift. As the year wore on, I started to feel a strange resignation about my situation. Life with Claire brought fleeting happiness, but I knew I couldn't avoid the inevitable forever. One crisp autumn afternoon, I was alone in the cabin, feeling a strange tension in the air that I couldn't quite identify. After tending the wood stove and pouring a cup of coffee, I was startled by the door slamming open. Lucas Wilson stood there, just as intimidating as I remembered. He wore a menacing grin and clutched a battered police revolver awkwardly, as though he wasn't entirely sure how to handle it. For a long moment, we simply stared at each other in silence. I braced for some dramatic declaration of vengeance, but instead, Lucas snapped, "Coffee? You bastard. I've spent over $10,000 tracking you down." When I offered him coffee, his response was a furious snarl. "No, I don't want your damn coffee. I want answers." "I know it was you," he growled, his voice trembling with fury. "Your wife told me all about your time spent target shooting. Hope there's good emergency services out here. You're gonna need it." His face turned a deep shade of red as he ranted, his words tumbling out with increasing rage. But then, abruptly, his expression twisted into one of pain and disbelief. The revolver fell from his hand as he dropped to one knee, letting out a piercing scream. A crossbow bolt jutted a full foot from his left buttock, its tip buried deep. Turning toward the doorway, I saw Claire standing there, smiling as though she hadn't a care in the world. We didn't waste any time. Leaving the cabin and its contents behind, we ran nearly the entire way back to Vista Lodge. Claire packed her belongings into the rental Land Rover in less than 15 minutes. We were laughing uncontrollably, like teenagers caught in a ridiculous prank. By the time we merged onto US 80, we had mostly calmed down. At breakfast the next morning, a sense of relief washed over us. Breaking the silence, Claire remarked casually, "He's probably already pulled out the bolt and gotten himself to the hospital." I shook my head with a smirk. "Doubt it. That's a hunting broadhead. It needs to be surgically removed. He'll be flat on his stomach in an ER, probably cursing the entire way there. Should make for an interesting explanation." I chuckled. "Well, Claire, it seems you've gotten us into quite the mess." She laughed in return, tapping her fork against her plate of scrambled eggs. After finishing breakfast, I gave Chuck a call to fill him in, while Claire made a separate call of her own. Chuck found the whole situation wildly entertaining. I mentioned that we were heading to Ocala, Florida, where my grandparents had lived many years ago. Chuck laughed knowingly, understanding that I only mentioned it to give him plausible deniability. While I was deep in conversation on the phone, Claire leaned over nonchalantly and slipped my wallet out of my pocket without a word. She returned to her seat and resumed her own call as though nothing had happened. Meanwhile, I busied myself selecting snacks for a trip whose details remained a mystery to me. Claire clearly had something planned, but she hadn't shared the specifics, and I didn't press for answers. I trusted her implicitly and was content to let her take the lead. It had been an exhausting day. That evening, we stopped at a quaint bed and breakfast nestled in the Wisconsin Dells. After hours on the road, fatigue overtook us, and we fell into bed, drifting off to sleep almost immediately. Morning arrived with a delicious breakfast, and soon we were back on the road. 4 hours later, we pulled into a Walmart parking lot in Duluth. Claire made a few purchases while I left empty-handed. She seemed to relish the element of surprise, and I didn't mind the suspense. By the time we departed, I had an entirely new wardrobe, and Claire carried a bag filled with snacks. For as long as I could remember, I had dreamed of paddling through the serene waters of a lake on a canoeing expedition. As it turned out, this dream was about to come true. When we arrived at the outfitter, it was clear everything had been prearranged. They even offered to handle the return of Claire's rental car, a clue that this was not a round-trip journey. The unpredictability of it all only heightened my excitement. I couldn't wait to see what other surprises Claire had in store. Before setting out, I managed to squeeze in one last call to Chuck Henry. "What did you do?" I asked, incredulously. "Wilson's latest scandal is all over the news." Chuck sounded genuinely confused, though I could hear June laughing in the background. "I have no idea what you're talking about," he replied, "but Wilson's reputation is tanking. Even the national outlets have picked up the story." "Well, it couldn't happen to a nicer guy," I said, savoring the poetic justice. "By the way, steer clear of the divorce angle. Rebecca never saw it coming. It hit her hard. I don't know how you pulled it off, but it worked." Chuck protested. "Seriously, I don't have a clue what you're on about. I haven't even called a lawyer." "Are you sure about that divorce?" I pressed. "Positive. She was shoving the papers in my face and screaming about it just this morning." "Well, good news for a change," I said with some relief. "By the way, could you swing by my cabin and arrange for someone to pick up my car and belongings?" "No problem. Where are you now?" "Moss Bluff, Florida, looking for a rental," I answered. As I ended the call, I saw Claire standing on the dock, waving. The canoe was packed tightly with supplies, ready for the journey ahead. I silently thanked my parents for insisting I attend Boy Scout camp as a kid. It had equipped me with the skills I'd need for this adventure. For the next 6 days, we paddled across tranquil lakes, setting up camp in a new spot each night. Claire navigated seamlessly, relying on GPS to guide us. I was happy to let her take the lead while I soaked in the breathtaking scenery. The best moments of the trip came at night, under the stars, when we shared stories that deepened the magic of the experience. By the afternoon of the final day, our adventure took an unexpected twist. We reached a secluded dock on a quiet road, where a man was waiting. Claire greeted him warmly and conversed fluently in French. After a brief exchange, he handed her a set of truck keys and a large envelope. We unloaded our gear from the canoe and drove off, leaving the man behind as he pushed the canoe back into the water. As Claire drove, she casually opened the envelope and sifted through its contents. "I suppose I should start calling you Benjamin," she said with a mischievous grin. I blinked, confused. "What are you talking about?" She laughed and handed me a Canadian driver's license with my photo on it. The name read, Benjamin Taylor. "You've got to be kidding me," I said, stunned. "Not at all," she replied, waving a matching Canadian passport in front of me. "Congratulations, Benjamin Taylor. You're officially Canadian now." "Wait, are we actually in Canada?" I asked, still reeling. "Of course," she said, as though it were the most natural thing in the world. 4 days after our adventure commenced, we arrived in Miyuki. Within a few hours, we made our way to Claire's family estate near Street Austell. The moment I crossed the threshold of their home, it felt strangely familiar, as though I had always belonged there. A profound sense of contentment settled over me, though a subtle tension simmered beneath the surface, a reminder that I was about to meet Claire's family for the very first time. The estate was breathtaking, a sprawling mansion that seemed to embody both elegance and a storied past. Claire's father greeted me with genuine warmth and escorted me to his study, a room steeped in character and tradition. My attention was immediately drawn to the far wall, where a magnificent walnut gun cabinet stood, commanding the room with its presence. With a calm, knowing expression, Claire's father unlocked the cabinet and reached inside. To my astonishment, he pulled out a rifle and handed it to me. The moment my hands touched the familiar weight of the weapon, I recognized it. It was my Remington 700, perfectly intact, its chamber ready. In that singular moment, clarity struck. This was where I was meant to be. This was home. Epilogue. Rebecca and the girls drifted out of my life, their presence reduced to faint, fleeting echoes. I never encountered them again, nor did I hear any news of their whereabouts. Chuck and June, however, remained tied to the narrative, their lives marked by a curious anomaly. Each year they received cryptic Christmas cards signed by Mr. and Mrs. Benjamin Taylor, a name that held no significance to them. This year's card, however, would bring something new. On its cover would be a family portrait. Claire, myself, and our 3 children, smiling warmly together. I have a hunch that this time, Chuck might finally unravel the mystery. And Lucas Wilson? Perhaps he never truly existed. This concludes the story. If you like it, then put your powerful like and subscribe to the channel. Greetings, my dear viewer. You're on the channel The Price of Cheating. The channel is for those who appreciate traditional family values and condemn adultery. So be sure to subscribe to the channel. Let's get started. It's been nearly 2 years since that fateful Christmas party, yet the memory of that night refuses to fade. Every sensation, every sound, every flicker of light remains vivid. The steady pulse of the music seems to play on in my head, and I can still feel the warmth of the room mingling with the glow of the string lights that wrapped the venue in a festive charm. The entire company was present, immersed in laughter, drinks in hand, dressed to the nines. Beside me, Tiffany, my wife, stood out like a star in her shimmering red dress, exuding elegance. To understand the significance of that evening, let me rewind. Tiffany and I had been together for 8 years, 5 of them as husband and wife. From the outside, We seemed like the couple everyone aspired to be, or so I thought. Sure, we had our ups and downs, but I believed our love was solid, unshakable. Tiffany was everything one might hope for, brilliant, quick-witted, and excelling in her career as a marketing director. I admired her accomplishments and trusted her completely. When Christmas rolled around, her company organized a grand holiday party. Attendance wasn't optional. It was expected for employees and their partners. Her boss, Rick, had made that clear. "It's supposed to be some team-building thing," Tiffany explained with a roll of her eyes. Something about Rick always made me uneasy. His name came up in our conversations too often for my liking, and the way she spoke about him left me feeling diminished. One day, I couldn't help but ask, "Don't you think you mention him a bit too much?" She'd laughed it off, calling it work talk, and assured me he was just a demanding boss, someone she found more intimidating than anything. But that night at the party, Rick didn't come across as intimidating at all. The event was lavish, live music, an open bar, and attendees dressed to impress. Tiffany and I mingled, chatting with her colleagues and sharing laughs. Yet, every now and then, I caught her looking across the room, her gaze lingering on Rick. His commanding presence seemed to draw everyone's attention, including hers. It unsettled me, though I tried to push the feeling aside. I convinced myself it was my imagination, a symptom of my own insecurities. As the evening unfolded and the drinks flowed, I found myself engrossed in conversation with a group of her co-workers. At some point, I realized Tiffany was no longer beside me. I scanned the room, but she was nowhere in sight. "Have you seen Tiffany?" I asked a few people nearby. Miley, one of her colleagues, hesitated before answering. "I think I saw her head upstairs with Rick," she said, avoiding my eyes. Her tone sent a chill down my spine. My chest tightened with an unshakable sense of foreboding. Excusing myself, I headed toward the elevator, hoping to find her upstairs, perhaps caught up in an innocent work-related discussion. The elevator ride felt like an eternity. My mind raced, each second intensifying my apprehension. When the doors finally opened, I stepped into a dim, hushed hallway. The contrast to the lively atmosphere downstairs was stark. Closed doors lined the corridor, some slightly ajar, revealing muted conversations and fleeting shadows. The festive ambiance felt tainted, replaced by something heavy and ominous. At the end of the hall stood Rick's office. Its glass walls were concealed by tightly shut blinds, projecting an eerie sense of privacy. My steps slowed as I approached, my heartbeat thundering in my ears. Each step felt heavier than the last, but I couldn't stop. I had to know. As I neared the office, faint sounds seeped through the door, soft voices, followed by a muffled moan. The sound sliced through me, freezing me in place. My heart sank, my fists clenched involuntarily, and a cold dread settled deep in my gut. Part of me wanted to turn back, to preserve the illusion of normalcy. But the other part, the one that needed answers, refused to let me retreat. With a trembling hand, I pushed the door open. The scene inside confirmed my worst fears. Tiffany was on Rick's desk, her once pristine red dress hiked up, her hair a disheveled mess. Rick stood there, utterly composed, as if he hadn't a care in the world. Tiffany, on the other hand, froze when she saw me, her face draining of color. "Ben, she stuttered, scrambling off the desk and fumbling to adjust her dress. Her wide, panicked eyes met mine, filled with something between shame and desperation. "What the hell is this, Tiffany?" My voice barely broke the silence, trembling with a mix of fury and heartbreak. "Ben, I'm so sorry," she began, her voice cracking. "This wasn't supposed to happen." But I wasn't interested in hearing her apologies. "Didn't mean for what? To betray your husband with your boss at the office Christmas party?" My voice slashed through the silence, each word colder and sharper than I thought myself capable of. Rick stood awkwardly a few steps away, fiddling with his tie as though it held the answers he couldn't articulate. He didn't look apologetic. If anything, he seemed bored, as though this confrontation was an inconvenience. Tiffany reached out to me, her hands shaking violently, tears streaking down her flushed face. "Ben, please," she choked out, her voice quivering. "This isn't what I wanted. It was a horrible mistake, a terrible lapse in judgment." "A mistake?" I repeated, my laugh empty and jagged, bouncing off the empty walls around us. "You call sleeping with your boss a mistake, Tiffany? That wasn't some accident. It was a choice. Your choice." Rick, who had been mute up to this point, finally found his voice. "Look, Ben," he began cautiously, his tone almost patronizing. "Maybe we should all just calm down. Things got a little out of hand." "Out of hand?" I cut him off, my words raw with fury, my own voice unrecognizable to my ears. "You're her boss, Rick. The line couldn't have been clearer, and yet you went out of your way to obliterate it. What kind of man preys on someone like this? What's wrong with you?" Rick shrugged, a move so indifferent it felt like a match thrown onto an already raging fire. His nonchalance was infuriating, a stark reminder of how little he cared. "You're not even sorry, are you?" I growled, my anger boiling over. "You don't even have the decency to fake regret. You didn't just betray me, you turned us both into a joke." For a moment, Rick's expression remained blank, but then a faint, arrogant smirk played across his lips. "Listen, buddy," he said, his words dripping with contempt. "It's not my fault your wife's a slut. If she actually loved or respected you, this wouldn't have happened. Guess you weren't giving her something she needed." His words struck like shards of broken glass, each one cutting deeper than the last. Before I knew what I was doing, my fist shot forward, connecting with his jaw. The impact was satisfying for a fleeting second, a visceral outlet for the rage that had consumed me. As Rick staggered back, clutching his face, I stood there, breathing hard, the adrenaline coursing through me. But as quickly as the satisfaction came, it faded, replaced by something colder. A realization began to take shape, chilling me to the core. Rick wasn't some irresistible force. He was just a man who saw an opportunity and took it. The bitter truth was, Tiffany had chosen this too. She wasn't a passive victim. She had made the same decision. The searing anger in my chest dulled into a hollow ache as I turned to face her. My voice, once full of warmth and love, now carried a sharp edge. "How long, Tiffany?" I asked, my tone cutting. "Was this what all those late nights were about? Was this your secret?" She avoided my gaze, her eyes glued to the floor. The weight of my accusation hung heavily in the air, her silence louder than any confession. I stepped closer, my voice cracking under the strain of heartbreak and fury. "How long has this been going on? How many times did you lie to my face, telling me you were working late? How many times did I trust you, believe you, while you were with him? Was I that naive? That blind? Did you think I'd never figure it out? Or did you think I was just too stupid to see it?" Her lips parted, but no words came. Instead, fresh tears spilled down her cheeks as she moved toward me, her hands reaching out as if to close the growing distance between us. "Ben, please, let me explain." "Don't," I snapped, holding up my hand to stop her. The gap between us felt insurmountable, as if her choices had carved an unbridgeable canyon. The woman I once knew, the woman I trusted, now felt like a stranger. "Keep your apologies. They hold no value for me anymore." I shook my head, struggling to keep the fury bubbling inside from spilling over. The betrayal was suffocating. "You've been lying to me," I said, my voice trembling with a mix of outrage and disbelief. You've been sneaking around with him behind my back. How many nights did I sit at home thinking we were fine while you were out there with him, breaking everything we built?" Her face crumpled, and at last she spoke, her voice faint and shaky. "I never meant for this to happen. I swear it wasn't supposed to be like this." I yanked my hand away from hers, looking at the tears streaming down her face. The anger I'd felt moments before had shifted into something heavier, a hollow ache that sat in the pit of my stomach. The woman I thought I knew, the one I'd loved for 8 years, now seemed like a stranger. The trust we had shared had disintegrated completely. "I'm done, Tiffany," I said, my voice eerily calm, stripped of all emotion. "You crossed a line, and there's no way to undo that." "Ben, please," she begged, clutching my hands as if her grip could hold us together. "I'll do anything, anything. It was a mistake, one I'll never make again. I swear on everything I love." "Everything you love?" I repeated bitterly, shaking my head in disbelief. "If you loved me, you wouldn't have let this happen in the first place." The silence in the room was oppressive, broken only by Tiffany's muffled sobs. In the corner, Rick stood stiffly, his face a mask of regret, clearly unprepared for his so-called fling to implode so catastrophically. I turned to Tiffany one last time, my resolve unshaken. "I'll send you the divorce papers after the holidays. Merry Christmas, Tiffany." She collapsed to her knees, crying and pleading for me to reconsider, but I was done. I walked out the door, leaving our shared history behind me. The days that followed were a blur of paperwork, Tiffany's hollow apologies, and uncomfortable conversations with mutual friends who had caught wind of the drama. She tried everything to make amends, offering therapy, begging for a second chance. But every time I saw her, the memory of her betrayal loomed too large. Shortly after the new year, I finalized my decision and filed for divorce. Tiffany made one last effort to change my mind, showing up at my apartment looking haggard and desperate. "Ben, please," she whispered. "I'll quit my job. I'll cut Rick out of my life entirely. I'll do whatever it takes." But my choice had already been made. "Tiffany," I replied, my voice steady but firm, "I know you're sorry, and I don't doubt your regret. But your apology doesn't erase what you did. It doesn't fix this." That night, she finally seemed to understand. I think she had clung to the hope that I might forgive her in time, but I couldn't, and I didn't want to. To me, love isn't just affection. It's loyalty, commitment, and trust, qualities she had shattered beyond repair. In the months that followed, I began to heal. I started dating again, cautiously, taking care not to rush. Through mutual friends, I occasionally heard updates about Tiffany. At first, she stayed at her job but distanced herself from Rick. Rumors circulated that she'd been demoted, her once strong reputation irreparably damaged. Rick didn't emerge unscathed either. The scandal hit his career hard, and his standing at the company suffered. Before long, Tiffany resigned. The judgmental stares, whispered gossip, and strained atmosphere became too much for her. She didn't just lose her job, she lost the confidence and pride she had once worn so easily. The last time I heard from her was months later, in the form of a handwritten letter. In it, she poured out her regrets, confessing that losing me was the greatest mistake of her life and that she wished she could undo everything. I read it once, felt a fleeting pang of sorrow, and then tossed it in the trash. Because trust, once shattered, can never truly be rebuilt. This concludes the story. If you like it, then put your powerful like and subscribe to the channel.